Let's start with the bad and slowly make our way to the stuff of nightmares.
Death by Black Company. Buraku Kigyo. Black companies, or Buraku Kigyo, are exploitative workplaces in Japan that push employees to the breaking point. These companies are known for extreme overwork, unpaid overtime, harassment, and complete disregard for workers' health. In a typical black company, new employees, often young graduates, are expected to work 12 to 18 hours a day, sometimes 7 days a week. Overtime can exceed 100 hours per month, and much of it goes unpaid. Employees face constant pressure, verbal abuse, and impossible targets. Many sleep at the office or skip meals just to keep up. This lifestyle slowly destroys the body and mind. Chronic exhaustion, high blood pressure, and severe stress build up. The result is often karoshi, death from overwork. Victims can suddenly suffer heart attacks, strokes, or cerebral hemorrhages. Others fall into deep depression and die by suicide, known as karoji satsu. One of the most famous cases is Matsuri Takahashi, a 24-year-old employee at the advertising giant Dentsu. In 2015, she worked over 100 hours of overtime in a single month while facing intense harassment. She took her own life on Christmas Day. Her death sparked national outrage and led to stricter labor reforms. Black companies often target young people and foreign workers because they are less likely to complain. Although Japan has introduced overtime caps and better awareness campaigns, these exploitative workplaces still exist. Number 9. Death in a gladiatorial mismatch. Imagine standing in the hot sand of the Roman Colosseum, thousands of people cheering for your death. This was the brutal reality of a gladiatorial mismatch, a fight deliberately staged to be unfair. In ancient Rome, not every gladiator fight was a fair contest between skilled warriors. A mismatch happened when a weak, inexperienced, or poorly armed fighter was thrown against a strong, trained professional. The victims were often condemned criminals, slaves, prisoners of war, or untrained novices. They might be given only a dull sword or no armor, while facing a heavily armed and experienced gladiator. The fight was usually short and one-sided. The professional gladiator would toy with the victim, cutting them, making them bleed and letting them suffer, all to entertain the bloodthirsty crowd. The weaker fighter would often run, beg for mercy, or collapse from fear and exhaustion. When the crowd gave the thumbs-down signal, the victor would deliver the final blow, usually stabbing the neck or chest. If the victim was still alive, an attendant would finish them off with a hammer. These mismatches were not true sporting events. They were public executions disguised as entertainment. While balanced gladiator fights sometimes ended with both fighters surviving, mismatches almost always guaranteed death. They were used to demonstrate Roman power and to satisfy the public's demand for blood. Roman emperors and wealthy sponsors used these spectacles to gain popularity with the people. To the crowd, it was thrilling entertainment. To the victim, it was a terrifying and painful death on display for tens of thousands. Gladiatorial mismatches remind us how entertainment and cruelty were once deeply connected in human history. Today, we look back in horror at a time when death was turned into a public show. This form of death was slow enough to be agonizing, yet fast enough to keep the next fight coming. A brutal reminder of humanity's dark past. Number 3. Death by bazooka.
Rest in peace, my granny. She got hit by a bazooka. Kaboom. Kablow. Kaboom.
Pause. Death by bazooka is one of the most destructive and violent ways a human being can die in modern warfare. The bazooka is a portable rocket launcher. First used by American soldiers in World War II, it fires a high-explosive anti-tank rocket at tremendous speed. While designed to destroy armored vehicles, when turned against a person, the results are catastrophic. When the rocket strikes a human body, the shaped-charged warhead detonates on impact. It creates a superheated jet of molten metal that instantly burns through flesh, bone, and organs. The explosive blast wave tears the body apart from the inside, while shrapnel rips through everything nearby. A direct hit to the torso or head often leaves almost nothing recognizable behind. In many cases, the victim is killed instantly. Limbs can be severed, the body disintegrated, and surrounding tissue charred by extreme heat. Even a near miss can be fatal. The powerful shockwave can rupture lungs, burst internal organs, and cause massive internal bleeding. Survivors of glancing hits suffer horrific injuries, including amputations, severe burns, and trauma that are almost impossible to survive without immediate emergency care. Throughout history, bazookas and similar rocket launchers like the Russian RPG-7 have been used in countless wars. In some brutal conflicts and terrorist acts, they have even been used at close range against bound prisoners as a form of execution, turning a military weapon into an instrument of pure terror. Unlike ancient tortures that were designed to prolong suffering for hours or days, death by bazooka is almost always instantaneous. The horror comes not from drawn-out pain, but from overwhelming industrial-scale destruction of the human body. This type of death represents the terrifying power of modern weapons, tools built to destroy tanks being used against soft human targets. It serves as a grim reminder of how technology has made killing faster, more efficient, and far more devastating than anything our ancestors could imagine. Number 4. Death by remote-controlled drone. Death by remote-controlled drone represents one of the most modern and impersonal forms of killing in the 21st century. Military drones, such as the American MQ-9 Reaper or smaller FPV drones used in conflicts like Ukraine, allow operators sitting thousands of miles away to deliver lethal strikes with precision. These unmanned aerial vehicles can hover silently over a target for hours, watching and waiting, before releasing missiles, bombs, or diving directly into the target as a kamikaze weapon. When a drone strike hits a person, death is usually extremely violent and sudden. Hellfire missiles or explosive warheads create a powerful blast that causes catastrophic trauma, shredding bodies with shrapnel, blast waves that rupture organs, and intense heat that causes severe burns. In many cases, victims are killed instantly. Those nearby can suffer horrific injuries, including amputations, internal bleeding, and disfigurement. What makes drone deaths particularly disturbing is the psychology behind them. The victim often has no warning. There is no visible enemy, no advancing army, just a quiet shadow in the sky and then sudden destruction. For the operator, it can feel like a video game, creating a strange emotional distance between killer and victim. Drone strikes have become common in modern warfare, especially in counterterrorism operations in places like Afghanistan, Yemen, Somalia, and now on the battlefields of Ukraine. While they are praised for reducing risk to soldiers, they have also caused controversy due to civilian casualties and the ethical questions of remote killing. Unlike ancient tortures designed to prolong suffering, death by drone is usually fast. The true horror lies in its cold efficiency and the feeling of constant, invisible surveillance from above. In our increasingly technological world, remote-controlled drones show how warfare has evolved. Killing can now be done from the safety of a control room on another continent, making death feel both precise and strangely detached. Number 5. Rat torture. One of the most psychologically terrifying forms of torture in history is known as rat torture. The method is brutally simple yet horrifying. The victim was stripped and tightly restrained on their back. A live rat, or sometimes several rats, was placed directly onto their exposed abdomen. Then, an upside-down metal bowl or pot was placed over the rats, trapping them against the victim's skin with no way out. The torturer would then slowly heat the bowl using hot coals or a flame. As the bowl grew hotter and hotter, the rats became desperate to escape the burning heat. With no other exit available, they began frantically clawing and gnawing their way into the victim's stomach. The victim, fully conscious, would feel the rats biting through their skin and muscle, then burrowing deeper into their intestines and internal organs. The entire process could last for hours. Screams, the sound of scratching, and the movement inside their own body created unimaginable psychological and physical torment. Death eventually came from massive blood loss, infection, or shock. A common variant involved forcing starving rats into the victim's anus or vagina, then sealing the opening. The rats would chew their way inward, causing even more agonizing internal damage. This method was used in medieval Europe, notably during the Dutch Revolt in the 16th century, and reportedly in some 20th century dictatorships. It was favored because it broke victims mentally long before they died physically. Few tortures combine such primal fear with such prolonged suffering. Rat torture stands as one of history's darkest examples of human cruelty, using a living creature's natural survival instincts to slowly devour a person from the inside out. Even today, the mere description of this torture triggers deep disgust and fear in most people. It reminds us how far humanity has gone in inventing ways to inflict maximum pain on others. Number 6. The Brazen Bull. Perhaps one of the most cruel and creative execution devices in history is the Brazen Bull, also known as the Bronze Bull or Sicilian Bull. A fire was then lit underneath the bull's belly. As the bronze heated up, the inside of the statue slowly turned into a deadly oven. The victim was roasted alive. The intense heat burned their skin, cooked their flesh, and caused unimaginable pain as they slowly suffocated and burned to death. But the most horrifying feature was the special piping system built into the bull's head. As the victim screamed in agony, their cries traveled through the pipes and emerged from the bull's nostrils and mouth as loud, distorted, bellowing sounds, exactly like a real bull. The victim's suffering was literally turned into a grotesque form of entertainment for the audience. The brazen bull was invented in ancient Sicily, around 570 BCE, by a man named Perillus and given to the tyrant Phalaris. According to legend, Phalaris's first test of the device was on Perillus himself. This method was designed not just to kill, but to maximize suffering while turning human agony into public spectacle. Death could take anywhere from several minutes to over an hour, depending on how the fire was controlled. The brazen bull stands as a terrifying symbol of ancient tyranny where technology, art, and cruelty were combined into one horrific machine. It reminds us of humanity's disturbing ability to transform pain into entertainment. Number 7. The breaking wheel. One of the most painful and humiliating forms of public execution in European history was death on the breaking wheel, also known as the Catherine wheel. The victim was first tied spread eagle onto a large wooden wheel laid flat on the ground. Then, the executioner used a heavy iron bar or hammer to systematically break the victim's bones. Starting with the legs and arms, the executioner crushed the limbs in multiple places, often at the joints and major bones, while avoiding immediate fatal injuries. Each strike was delivered with precision to maximize suffering. After the limbs were completely shattered, the broken body was woven through the spokes of the wheel. The mangled arms and legs were threaded between the spokes, contorting the body into a grotesque, unnatural position. The wheel was then raised upright on a tall pole, like a gruesome display stand, high above the crowd. Left exposed in this position, the victim faced a slow and agonizing death. Many survived for hours or even days. They suffered from extreme shock, massive internal bleeding, dehydration, exposure to the elements, and infection. While still alive, birds would often descend and peck at the helpless victim's flesh and open wounds. This punishment was commonly used across Europe from the Middle Ages through the 18th century, especially for serious crimes like murder, treason, or highway robbery. It served as both torture and a powerful public deterrent. The sight of a broken body slowly dying on a wheel was meant to terrify everyone who saw it. The breaking wheel was eventually abolished in most countries by the early 19th century as societies moved away from such spectacular cruelty. However, it remains one of history's most infamous examples of prolonged public torture. Number 8. Ling Chi, Death by 1,000 Cuts, China. Ling Chi, commonly known as death by 1,000 cuts, was one of the most infamous and prolonged execution methods in Chinese history. The condemned person was tied to a wooden post in a public square. Executioners would then begin the process of cutting the victim's body with sharp knives. They sliced off pieces of flesh, muscle, and eventually larger body parts in a slow, methodical manner. The goal was not to kill the victim quickly, but to prolong their suffering for as long as possible. Skilled executioners deliberately avoided cutting major arteries or vital organs in the beginning. They would remove toes, fingers, slices of flesh from the arms, legs, chest, and face, sometimes hundreds of cuts. The victim remained conscious and aware through most of the ordeal, enduring extreme pain and blood loss. The entire process could last anywhere from several minutes to several hours, depending on the sentence and the executioner's precision. In the final stage, the executioner would deliver a fatal cut, often to the heart or a deep throat slash, or decapitate the victim. The remains were usually displayed publicly as a warning. Ling Chi was reserved for the most serious crimes, such as treason, patricide, or matricide. It was practiced in China for over 1,000 years and was not fully abolished until 1905, during the final years of the Qing dynasty. This brutal method was designed to punish not only the body but also the soul, as it was believed that a body destroyed in this way could not be whole in the afterlife. Photographs from the early 20th century showing Ling Chi executions shocked the Western world and contributed to its eventual ban. Ling Chi remains one of history's most extreme examples of calculated, prolonged human cruelty. Number 9. Scaphism, Ancient Persia. Scaphism, also known as the boats, is considered one of the most gruesome and degrading execution methods in ancient history. It was reportedly used by the Persians around the 5th century BCE. The victim was stripped naked and trapped between two small boats or inside a hollowed-out tree trunk with only their head, hands, and feet left exposed. The two boats were then sealed tightly together, forming a coffin-like container. Executioners force-fed the victim large amounts of milk and honey and smeared the mixture all over their face, exposed limbs, and body. The person was then left floating in a stagnant pond or marsh. As time passed, the victim suffered severe diarrhea and vomiting inside the enclosed space, creating a pool of filth. The sweet honey attracted swarms of flies, wasps, and insects. These insects would crawl into every orifice and begin burrowing into the victim's flesh, laying eggs and eating them alive from the inside and outside. The victim endured days of unimaginable torment, burning heat from the sun, constant insect bites and infestation, dehydration, infection, and the horror of slowly being devoured while still conscious. According to ancient accounts, one victim named Mithridates reportedly survived for 17 days in this state. Scaphism was reserved for the worst crimes, such as treason or killing a member of the royal family. It combined physical agony with extreme psychological torture and public humiliation. This method stands as a horrifying example of ancient ingenuity and cruelty, using nature itself to slowly destroy a human being in one of the most degrading ways imaginable. Number 10. Flaying alive of all the execution methods in ancient history. Few were as methodical, as public, and as deliberately theatrical as flaying alive. This was not a punishment carried out in secret dungeons. It was performed in open daylight before crowds by order of kings. Flaying, the complete removal of a living person's skin, was one of the signature punishments of the Assyrian Empire, one of the most powerful and feared civilizations of the ancient world. The Assyrians ruled from roughly 900 to 600 BCE, controlling vast territories across what is now Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and Egypt. They were brilliant engineers, lawmakers, and military strategists. They were also masters of terror, and they knew exactly how to use extreme punishment to maintain control over conquered peoples. What makes Assyrian flaying uniquely disturbing is that they recorded it themselves in graphic detail. With pride, stone carvings and royal inscriptions found across ancient Assyrian palaces depict flaying scenes in careful detail, alongside the boasts of kings who ordered them. King Ashurnasirpal II, who ruled around 883 BCE, wrote in his own royal annals, "I flayed as many nobles as had rebelled against me and draped their skins over the city walls." The process itself was performed by skilled executioners trained specifically for this purpose. Speed was not the goal, precision was. The victim was restrained, sometimes tied standing upright against a post, sometimes laid flat. The executioner began at the face or the back, using a sharp curved blade to separate the skin from the underlying tissue. The skin was removed in large sections: face, scalp, torso, limbs peeled away, while the victim remained fully conscious and aware of every cut. The human body's pain response to this kind of injury is almost incomprehensible. Every nerve ending in the skin fires simultaneously. There is no part of the body that does not scream. Death did not come quickly. Without skin, the body loses heat and fluid at a catastrophic rate. The exposed muscle tissue is immediately vulnerable to infection, and the open air. Victims could survive anywhere from several minutes to several hours, depending on how the flaying was conducted and whether the executioner was instructed to prolong it. But for the Assyrians, the death itself was almost secondary. What mattered was what came after. The removed skin was stretched, dried, and publicly displayed, draped over city walls, nailed to gates, wrapped around pillars at the entrance of conquered cities. It was a message sent not just to the victim, but to every person who passed through those gates, every soldier who considered rebellion, every king who thought about resistance. The Assyrians understood something deeply psychological, that the fear of what might happen to your body after death was sometimes more powerful than the fear of death itself. Flaying was also used on enemies of particular importance: rebel leaders, rival kings, military commanders. The higher your status, the more public and elaborate your flaying would be.
In some recorded cases, the victim's skin was stuffed and displayed as a trophy in the Assyrian king's palace, alongside looted gold and conquered battle standards, a human being reduced to a decorative object, a warning, a trophy, a statement of absolute power. The practice was not unique to Assyria. Flaying appears in ancient China, in Aztec religious ceremonies, in medieval European punishments for heresy and treason. But nowhere was it so systematically documented, so openly celebrated, and so deliberately weaponized as a tool of imperial terror as it was in ancient Assyria. The stone carvings still exist today. You can stand in museums in London, Paris, and Baghdad and look directly at ancient depictions of this punishment, carved by the people who carried it out, who saw nothing wrong with recording it for eternity. That is perhaps the most disturbing detail of all, not just that it happened, but that those who did it considered it worth commemorating in stone. Flaying alive stands as one of history's most extreme intersections of pain, power, and public spectacle, a punishment designed not just to end a life, but to erase a person's very physical existence as a final act of dominance. Some things, once carved in stone, cannot be forgotten.